In the freezing Seattle rain, Mrs. Harlan was pushed out onto the street with nothing but a $10 bill from her own daughter-in-law. 2 years later, she returned to that family dinner, not to beg, but to open a gift box that would strip away all of their lies. Hello, everyone. I am Casey. Today's story is not just about rising from the ashes, but about the moment a woman decided to stand up and protect her final dignity against the ones she once called family. Join me as we listen to Mrs. Harlan's story. I often stand by the large window of my Seattle office, looking out at the calm surface of Lake Washington. The rain falls steadily against the glass, like a meditation track, helping me maintain the composure I bought with my own blood and tears. The woman I am today, draped in an expensive silk robe and sipping hot Italian coffee, seems to have forgotten the freezing cold from 2 years ago. But then, my phone vibrates on the desk, and a name appears that makes my entire body freeze. Tatum. Mom, I miss you so much. How are you? We really want to invite you to dinner this Friday. Tatum's voice rings through the speaker, sweet as honey. But to me, it is as bitter as poison. The daughter-in-law who once threw my luggage out the door on a rainy night is now calling me Mom with a carefully practiced affection. My heart races, not out of emotion, but because of the disgust churning in my chest. 2 years of silence suddenly shatter because of an invitation that I know for certain hides a black hole of calculation. Memories rush back, sharp as a knife. I remember that night so clearly. Lauren, the husband who once promised me the moon and stars, stood with his back against the door, his eyes vacant as he watched Tatum shove a $10 bill into my hand. "Take the bus and find somewhere else. Stop haunting this house," she said, before I could even process that I had lost everything in a failed investment. That crumpled $10 bill was all they had for the person who sacrificed her entire youth to build that home. I stood in the rain, watching my own front door slam shut, feeling like nothing more than a broken piece of furniture tossed into a landfill. I take a deep breath, sensing the scent of luxury and power surrounding me now. I am no longer the weak woman kneeling in the rain that night. I look down at my hands that were once cracked from manual labor at a seedy motel, now meticulously cared for. A thought flashes, cold and decisive. Do they think I am still a failure, a mine for them to exploit? "That sounds lovely, Tatum," I answer, my voice unnervingly calm. "I will be there. I also have a gift for you all." I hang up, looking at my reflection in the glass, a smile that does not reach my eyes appearing. This dinner, I will show them the true value of that $10 bill. After I put the phone down, I did not immediately return to the real estate files on my desk. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out an old tablet, a device that still held the digital remnants of a life I lived while under the illusion of family unity. I scrolled through photos of backyard barbecues and Christmas mornings where the lights seemed to glow with a warmth that I now know was artificial. Looking at those smiling faces today, the images feel like layers of glossy paint slapped over a structure that had been rotting for decades. I realize now that the betrayal by Tatum and Lauren was not some sudden storm. It was a pattern, a blueprint they had been following for years, while I willfully kept my eyes closed. I remember my 58th birthday vividly. I had spent the afternoon preparing slow-roasted ribs and a deep-dish apple pie that filled the house with the scent of cinnamon. I waited at the table for a doorbell that never rang. Instead, I received a text from Tatum saying they were tied up at a charity gala for the golf club. They were so busy playing the role of pillars of the community that they forgot the mother sitting alone in the dark. In a strange twist of fate, it was the plumber who happened to stop by to finish a repair who saw me. He stayed, wished me a happy birthday, and shared a slice of pie. Then there was the time I had to have gallbladder surgery. While my own daughter-in-law and husband stood in the hallway, arguing about who would sacrifice their time to drive me to the hospital, it was Mrs. Gable, a neighbor I had only exchanged polite nods with, who sat by my hospital bed. She held my trembling hand until the anesthesia took hold, a stranger providing the comfort my own blood refused to give. It is a senseless inversion. Why is it that strangers with no biological tie can show more grace than the people I would have died for? I remember a party where Tatum was the picture of elegance, guiding a friend to her car with such performative kindness. Moments later, she was in the kitchen, snapping at me because I had accidentally dropped a crystal glass. She told me that if I was too old to be useful, I should just stay out of the way and stop being a burden. Lauren stood right there, but he didn't say a word. He just adjusted his tie and looked away, treating me like a piece of outdated furniture he was waiting to haul to the curb. Their presence in my life always coincided with a need. They needed a signature on a power of attorney. They needed me to cover Tatum's credit card debt. Or they needed me to maintain the image of a happy family for Lauren's business partners. I lied to myself for so long, telling myself they were just busy. But that night in the rain, with that $10 bill, the illusion shattered. I turned off the tablet and let the screen go dark. A bitter truth has crystallized. To them, I was never a person. I was a tool. And now that this tool has become more powerful and wealthy than they ever imagined, they want to come back? A cold, steady resolve is rising within me. I will never let myself be a victim of their convenience again. For the first few weeks after being thrown out of my own home, I still found myself checking my phone every 10 minutes. I wondered what I was even hoping for. Maybe I expected a groveling text from Lauren or a tearful call from Tatum, claiming it was all just a big misunderstanding. But the screen remained black and cold, just like that night in the rain. It was not until one morning at a roadside motel on the outskirts of Seattle that I truly looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen and my hair was a mess. But for the first time, I asked myself why I was still waiting on people who treated me like garbage. In that moment, I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air and decided that my wait for them ended right there. I began to notice the people around me, those I used to just pass by without a second thought. Joe, the motel owner, with his bushy beard and gentle smile, always had a hot cup of black coffee waiting for me every morning. To give back, I spent a few of my last dollars on ingredients and baked a traditional American apple pie in the motel's tiny communal kitchen. Watching Joe and the other guests savor those warm slices while offering their sincere praise made me feel a strange warmth in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt truly appreciated, not for what I owned, but for who I was as a person. Slowly, I stepped into a new world by joining a local church volunteer group dedicated to helping women facing financial hardships. That is where I met Merritt, a retired lawyer with sharp eyes and a heart full of compassion. She did not just teach me how to protect my legal rights. She introduced me to a small community real estate investment club. During those passionate discussions about market trends and property potential, I realized I had a sharp instinct for numbers and a natural eye for homes with hidden value. One afternoon, after our group finished renovating a community garden, we sat on the soft grass drinking lemonade and chatting about our wildest dreams. Someone told a joke about a mistake they made when they were younger, and I actually laughed. It was a bright, genuine laugh that surprised even me. Merritt patted my shoulder and told me I had the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. I realized then that family does not have to be defined by blood. Family is the people who choose to stay by your side when you have nothing left. A wave of relief washed over me, and I knew that from this moment on, I was finally free. Have you ever found that a stranger can be kinder than your own kin? Sometimes, an unexpected connection changes your whole perspective. Has a stranger ever touched your heart? Please share your heartwarming stories below. I'd love to hear how they brightened your life. That laughter over lemonade with Merritt wasn't just a pleasant moment. It was a solemn vow. I understood then that to never hold that humiliating $10 bill again, I had to possess real strength. I began spending 16 hours a day studying foreclosure lists in the Tacoma and Seattle areas. Instead of dwelling on my pain, I poured every ounce of that resentment into numbers, zoning maps, and tense bidding sessions. I started with the most dilapidated small houses that no one else would touch, and I transformed them into real homes using my own hands and mind. I remember the sweltering early summer days in Washington state, where I painted peeling walls in old suburban apartments by myself. Sweat soaked my clothes, and my hands became calloused from holding hammers and pliers. But every time a new tile was laid, I felt like I was rebuilding my own life. I learned to negotiate with contractors and to see the potential of a plot of land beneath a layer of weeds. My first profit of $20,000 from flipping a small house made me cry. It wasn't about the money, but because I knew I had conquered my greatest fear, the fear of being abandoned and starving. That was the first brick of the empire, known as Harlan Estates. 2 years passed like a stormy blink of an eye. From a woman with nothing, I now own a portfolio worth over $10 million. I moved into a penthouse overlooking Lake Washington, where every morning I can see yachts gliding across the deep blue water. My kitchen is now lined with pristine white marble, and my wine cellar is full of premium vintages. But this luxury does not make me forget the nature of those who turn their backs on me. When I received that reconciliation call from Tatum, I did not waver. I knew it was time to see through that sweet mask with ironclad evidence. I did not go to that dinner with any naivete. I called Merritt, and she introduced me to Marcus Reed, a private investigator known for investigating financial fraud. Sitting in my minimalist office, I looked at that middle-aged man with his sharp gaze and told him I needed to know everything. I didn't just want to know what they were doing, but why they were calling me now. Marcus just nodded, and 2 weeks later, a thick file was placed on my desk. What was inside was not just a surprise, but a profound disgust at the corruption of the people I once called family. The first report was about Tatum. My sweet daughter-in-law was not as successful as she boasted on social media. She was operating an online shop called Luxe Living Essentials, specializing in fake, high-end furniture. Her scheme involved taking large deposits from customers, but never delivering the goods or sending total junk. She was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and a group of lawyers was preparing to prosecute her. It turned out that the longing dinner invitation was actually a desperate attempt to find a deep pocket to cover her fraudulent holes. But what pained me most was the information about Lauren. Marcus had captured photos of him, healthy and lifting weights in a discreet gym, which was the complete opposite of his Instagram fundraising campaign. Lauren was posing as a terminal cancer patient, taking advantage of the community's compassion to fund a lavish lifestyle after his real business collapsed. Seeing a photo of him smiling and drinking champagne while his personal page posted fake hospital photos sent a cold chill through my heart. They had sold their souls just to cling to material things. I closed the file and took a deep breath to regain my composure. I didn't feel sad. I felt a strange clarity. Their betrayal had reached the level of social crime. I picked up the phone and called Merritt, telling her we would proceed with the plan. I wanted this dinner to be more than just a meeting. I wanted it to be a handoff of these truths to the authorities. I would not use violence. I would use the law and the truth to protect myself. I looked at the empty gift box on the table and smiled bitterly. The real gift I had for them would be an encounter with exactly what they had created. Before leaving the office to prepare for dinner, I looked at myself in the mirror. A strong woman, dressed in a dark navy silk suit, wearing a simple but powerful string of pearls. I was no longer the poor Mrs. Holland, pushed out with a $10 bill. I was the keeper of the truth. Confidence spread through every cell of my body. I knew I was doing the right thing, not out of hatred, but for justice. This dinner would be the end of the years of deception and the beginning of a new chapter where truth and dignity are celebrated. I sat in my comfortable leather armchair, staring at Marcus's files on the desk. The numbers detailing Tatum's massive debts and Lauren's elaborate deceptions served as cold proof of their moral decay. I understood that before I could carry out justice, I needed one final answer for myself. I needed to know if there was even a millimeter in their hearts left for family, or if everything had truly become a dry balance sheet. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling slightly, but my eyes remained calm. I dialed Tatum's number. "Tatum, it is Mom," I said, intentionally lowering my voice to make it sound thin and full of anxiety. I told her a story about a catastrophic investment mistake and a stock market crash that had wiped out my entire portfolio overnight. I told her the penthouse was being sealed and that I might have to move back into one of those cheap motels. There was a long silence on the other end. It was so quiet, I could hear the rapid, calculating breaths of my supposedly devoted daughter-in-law. The sweetness from our previous call vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp and unfamiliar tone. "Well, how much do you have left?" she asked. "Surely you have something to get by on." When I replied that I was truly penniless and hoped that this Friday's dinner would be a place where I could find some comfort, Tatum didn't even try to hide her extreme disappointment. "Are you kidding me, Mom?" she snapped. "Dad and I have so much to deal with right now. Do you really expect to come here and be a burden on us again?" She didn't even bother to ask where I would sleep or what I would eat tonight. The words about missing me earlier vanished like soap bubbles. She started grumbling about having to cancel the dinner due to a sudden busy schedule. But I knew it was because the gold mine she intended to dig was dry. Her pragmatism was so naked, it made me feel physically ill. I hung up before she could offer some cowardly excuse to reject me. A strange sense of relief washed over me. The anxiety and the nerves were gone. I looked into the large mirror in my living room and saw a woman who was steady and strong. They had chosen to abandon me the moment they thought I had no value. Therefore, I would choose to show them the true value of fairness. I called Detective Marcus back and told him the plan had not changed. I would still go to that dinner, but as a judge, not as a beggar. I was finally ready to face them one last time. After I hung up the phone with Tatum, I did not allow myself to sink into the depths of disappointment for very long. The sharp, stinging pain that usually followed her voice was replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I understood then that with people like Tatum and Lauren, who viewed family merely as a financial instrument, they would stop at nothing to seize what I had built, especially now that they were backed into a corner. I looked out the window at the Seattle skyline as the city began to glow with evening lights and the skyscrapers twinkled like clusters of diamonds. I had built my empire from the ashes of my old life, and I would not let anyone, not even those who shared my blood, destroy it with their practiced lies. It was time for me to erect an impenetrable wall of defense. The next morning, I arrived at Merritt Klein's office exactly at 8 o'clock. Merritt looked at me, her eyes narrowing behind her horn-rimmed glasses, as she asked if I was truly ready for what came next. I nodded and handed her the copies of my property deeds and my current investment portfolio. We spent the entire morning reviewing and updating my last will and testament and my power of attorney. I stripped away every single right and benefit that Lorne and Tatum once held in my older documents. In their place, I designated a charitable fund for orphaned children, with Merritt herself as the executor. I wanted to ensure that no matter what happened, not a single cent of mine would ever fall into the hands of the people who had once discarded me with a $10 bill. The feeling of signing those new papers was incredibly light, like I was finally unlinking an invisible chain that had bound me for decades. To prevent any future attempts they might make to claim I was no longer of sound mind to manage my assets, a cowardly tactic I knew Lorne often whispered about, I decided to take a drastic step. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Harrison at the renowned Virginia Mason Clinic for a comprehensive mental competency and physical health evaluation. Amid the rising respiratory disease season in Seattle, the clinic was filled with the sharp scent of antiseptic and the hum of busy medical staff. I patiently went through every cognitive test, answering the most difficult questions with an absolute sharpness. When I finally held that certificate of perfect health and mental clarity in my hand, I knew I had stripped them of the strongest weapon they planned to use to manipulate me in a courtroom later. Later that afternoon, Detective Marcus Reed handed me a USB drive containing the full weight of the evidence he had gathered. I sat back in my office and scrolled through the covert photos of Tatum meeting with other known scammers and the copies of the fraudulent medical records Lorne used to solicit donations on social media. I even asked Marcus to extract old text messages from 2 years ago, the insults and the mockery they sent, while I was wandering between cheap motels. Each data file was a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. I printed them all out and organized them into a neat dossier, tucked inside a luxurious leather briefcase. This was not a weapon for revenge, but the undeniable evidence of justice. Before preparing for the dinner itself, I stopped by a high-end gift shop downtown. I selected the most elegant champagne gold silk gift box and tied it with a vibrant red velvet ribbon. Inside, I placed nothing but a small slip of paper with the number 10 written on it. This box was a symbol of the emptiness in their souls and a reminder of the humiliating pittance they had offered me. It looked magnificent on the outside, but it was hollow within, exactly like the performance Tatum and Lorne were trying to give. I stroked the smooth silk, feeling a bitter sense of satisfaction. Everything was finally ready. I drove my sleek black SUV through the familiar streets of the Magnolia neighborhood myself. Seattle, in the late afternoon, felt somber, as the cherry trees had lost all their leaves, leaving only bare branches etched against a gray sky. I passed the places where I used to perform manual labor, where I had to grit my teeth and endure the disregard of others just to save every penny I could. Those memories no longer hurt me. They were the valuable lessons that forged the woman I am today. I looked into the rearview mirror and saw a confident woman with dark crimson lipstick and eyes that did not waver. I was going there to close an old chapter of my life. I pulled the car up in front of the old house, the place that was once the nest I spent half my life caring for. It looked smaller and more dilapidated than I remembered, with the white paint peeling away and the front garden choked with weeds. This was the exact spot where I was pushed out onto the street without a shred of mercy. I stood at the door and took a deep breath of the cold evening air. Inside my briefcase was legal power. In my pocket was medical certification, and in my mind was a perfect plan. I reached out and pressed the doorbell. The chime rang out, cutting through the silence of the neighborhood. I smiled, a powerful smile of the person who now held the entire board. The dinner of masks had officially begun. I sat there in the living room that had once been the very soul of my existence, watching Tatum prattle on about her future business plans. The smoky aroma of American-style grilled ribs drifted from the kitchen. But instead of feeling the cozy warmth of a home, I felt a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. Yet every time my fingers brushed against the phone in my suit pocket, I felt a surge of warmth. I knew that out there in the Seattle nightlights, people were awake because of me, protecting me with their professionalism and compassion. I was no longer the woman who had been discarded in solitude 2 years ago. I recalled the brief call with Merritt just before I walked into this house. Her voice was low and calm, but it contained an unshakable strength. She told me she would not take her eyes off the screen, and that all the documents had been sent to the prosecutor's office, with the process server ready. Merritt was more than just my lawyer. She had become the sister I never had. She understood the pain of a woman pushed to the fringes of society, and she used her legal knowledge to build me a suit of iron armor. Sitting at this table, facing Lauren's lies, I felt a quiet gratitude for Merritt. The dedication of a stranger like her taught me the true meaning of commitment. Under the table, my phone vibrated twice, which was the signal for Marcus. It was the code, letting me know he had finished tracking Tatum's bank accounts to ensure no funds could be spirited away at this moment. Marcus was a man of few words, who once told me he did this work not just for the fee, but because he hated those who bullied the elderly. I imagined him sitting in his familiar truck in the Seattle drizzle, his eyes never leaving the surveillance equipment. His silent presence was a reminder that this world still has quiet heroes, willing to stand up for what is right, without needing any applause. My gaze accidentally drifted to the old family photo on the bookshelf, an image I once cherished. Now, looking at it, I only saw 3 strangers putting on a performance. The contrast was sharper than ever. My husband and my daughter-in-law, who were supposed to be family, were the ones trying to drain the last bit of value from me. Meanwhile, Merritt and Marcus, whom I had only known for a few years, were sacrificing their time and effort to ensure my safety and dignity were respected. I suddenly understood a simple but painful truth: that family is sometimes not where you are born, but where you are chosen to belong. The surge of gratitude in my heart allowed me to regain an absolute composure. When Tatum placed a rib on my plate and said in a coaxing voice that she knew I loved this dish the most, I simply smiled gently. I no longer felt rage, only a deep sense of pity. They thought they had a hold on me, but they did not know I was enveloped in a network of kindness and professionalism. Every action I took now carried the breath of confidence, because I knew I had steel allies behind me. I took a sip of the wine, feeling the slight dryness on my tongue, and I was ready for the final curtain to fall. The feeling of loneliness had completely vanished. I felt the strength from the well wishes of my friends at the church and from the encouraging nod Joe, the motel owner, gave me once. All of them, in one way or another, had contributed to the strong version of Harlan I am today. I looked directly into Lauren's eyes as he tried to play the part of a repentant husband with a fake, gaunt face, and I saw that I had completely moved past the pain of abandonment. I had a new family now, a family built on respect and sincerity rather than exploitation. The doorbell was about to ring, and I knew it would be the sound of justice beginning to speak. Friends, have you ever felt that a dear friend or colleague understood you better than your own family? Who was there for you in your darkest hour? Please share a thank you or a story about that wonderful ally below. I sat directly across from Lauren, watching him carefully as he chewed a piece of slow-roasted rib. He was trying so hard to maintain that performance he had perfected over the last year. The act of a weary man whose strength was being sapped by a terminal illness. He moved with a calculated sluggishness, his shoulders slumped, and his eyes intentionally dimmed to solicit pity. Beside him, Tatum, the woman who had once thrown my life into a trash bag, was acting as the perfect hostess. She kept leaning over to refill my wine glass, her movements fluid, and her smile radiating a warmth that was far too bright to be genuine. The air in the old house was heavy with the rich, familiar scent of wood smoke and savory meat, and the speakers in the corner played a soft, melodic jazz track. To any outsider looking through the window, this would appear to be the quintessential American family reunion, a scene of healing and warmth. But I could feel the rot beneath the floorboards. I could sense the desperation in their quick glances and the hollow resonance of their laughter. Inside my handbag, the dossier I had carried in felt like a block of ice against my side, a cold weight of truth ready to be unleashed. The time for the performance was over, and the time for the reckoning had arrived. Tatum finally set the silver tongs down and leaned her elbows on the table, closing the distance between us. Her eyes sparkled with a manufactured sincerity that I now saw right through. "Mom," she began, her voice dropping into that sweet, coaxing tone she used when she wanted something. "I want to be completely honest with you. We didn't just invite you here because we've missed you, though we truly have. I know you've always been a woman of incredible vision and business sense, and that's why I want to share something huge with you. My company, Lux Living Essentials, is on the verge of becoming a household name. We have the designs and the demand, but we're facing a temporary hurdle with our supply chain in the north. We just need a little bit more liquid capital, about $200,000, to secure our biggest warehouse yet. I want you to be our primary partner. I want us to be a family that builds an empire together." She uttered the word family with such practiced ease, as if she hadn't stood on this very porch 2 years ago and watched me walk away into a storm with nothing but $10. Lauren let out a series of dry, theatrical coughs, nodding in agreement as he reached for my hand. "You should really consider it, Harlan," he whispered, his voice cracking for effect. "This is for all of us. This is our future." I looked deep into their eyes and saw nothing but the cold, hard hunger for my money, hidden behind a veil of flowery words and fake concern. At exactly 7:30, the sharp, rhythmic ring of the doorbell sliced through the jazz music. It was a sound so definitive, it felt like a gavel striking a bench. Tatum froze mid-sentence, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together in a flash of genuine irritation. "Now who on earth could that be at this hour?" she asked, the sweetness in her voice fraying at the edges. She stood up and smoothed her dress, walking toward the entryway while tossing a quick, reassuring smile over her shoulder at me. I sat perfectly still and took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the silence that stretched out from the foyer. Then, the quiet was shattered by a sharp, strangled gasp of surprise, followed by the frantic tapping of heels on the hardwood. Tatum stumbled back into the dining room, her face having turned a ghostly, bloodless white. In her trembling hand, she clutched a heavy, yellow legal envelope, emblazoned with the seal of a prominent law firm. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice high and erratic. "Mom, some crazy person just served me with a court summons. They must have the wrong address. They're talking about massive fraud and embezzlement related to the online store." Her lips were quivering, and she looked like a cornered animal. I set my glass down on the white tablecloth, the clink of the crystal sounding like a thunderclap in the room. My voice was low and steady as it cut through the rising tide of her panic. "It is not a mistake, Tatum. The prosecutor's office has been quietly building a case against Lux Living Essentials for the better part of 6 months. They have a mountain of evidence regarding the $150,000 in customer deposits that you moved into your personal offshore accounts. And as for the person who handed them the final set of transaction records and the server logs they needed to seal the indictment, you're looking at her. It was my private investigator who did the heavy lifting." Tatum stared at me, her mouth hanging open as the yellow envelope slipped from her nerveless fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. She tried to find the words to defend herself, to spin one more lie, but she was interrupted by the frantic buzzing of Lauren's phone on the table. A barrage of news alerts and messages lit up the screen like a firework display. He grabbed the device with shaking hands, his eyes darting across the screen as he read the lead story by Jessica Chen on the front page of the Seattle Times digital edition. The headline was devastating. "The Charity Vampire. Local businessman faked terminal cancer to fund lavish lifestyle." Lauren looked up at me, and in that moment, the mask of the dying man disintegrated. His eyes didn't look tired anymore. They burned with a mixture of pure, unadulterated disgust and a cornered kind of rage. "Harlan, what the hell have you done?" he spat, his voice no longer weak. "Are you actually trying to destroy us? Are you trying to ruin our lives after everything?" I stood up slowly, drawing myself to my full height and wrapping myself in the quiet authority of a woman who was finally the master of her own fate. "I am not destroying a single thing, Lauren. I am simply holding up a mirror so the world can see what you've become. I am bringing the truth into the light where it belongs. 2 years ago, the two of you stood in this house and told me I was a burden. You told me I was worthless and tossed me out like a piece of broken furniture. Today, I am simply returning the favor by giving you the exact value of the life you've built for yourselves. A pile of lies and a long list of crimes. You are not sick with cancer, Lauren. You are sick with an insatiable greed that has hollowed out your soul." A deep wave of physical revulsion washed over me as I watched them both sink into their chairs, their bodies sagging not from regret, but from the sheer weight of the legal consequences they knew were coming for them. I reached into my bag and pulled out the champagne gold silk gift box, placing it gently in the center of the table where the centerpiece used to be. "I told you I brought a gift for the two of you," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. Tatum reached for it with a desperate, frantic hope, her fingers fumbling with the red velvet ribbon as if she expected to find a signed check or a legal waiver inside to save her. But when the lid came off, all she found was a small, crisp slip of paper with the number 10 printed neatly in the center. "This is the $10 bill you pushed into my hand for the bus that night," I told them. Keep it. Study it. Let it be the monument to your own cruelty and the symbol of the utter lack of humanity you showed me. It is also the very last thing of value you will ever receive from me. I took a final look around the room, the place I had spent 30 years of my life turning into a home, and I realized it was nothing more than a stage for a long, ugly play that had finally reached its final act. They had lost everything the moment they'd tried to steal even more from the person they had already discarded. I picked up my leather briefcase and straightened the lapels of my navy silk suit, feeling the smooth fabric under my fingers. The sound of Tatum's jagged sobbing and Lauren's low, helpless swearing followed me as I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. For the first time in my life, that sound didn't hurt. It didn't trigger a sense of guilt or a need to fix things. The suffocating weight I had carried in my chest for decades had evaporated, leaving behind a lightness that made me feel like I was walking on air. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me for the last time. The Seattle air was sharp and cold, smelling of rain and the sea, and I breathed it in until my lungs felt full of life. Marcus was waiting by the curb, the headlights of the SUV cutting through the dark. I had done the impossible. I had faced the ghosts of my past, and I had laid them to rest with the simple, brutal power of the truth. As I walked toward the car, I knew that I was no longer a victim, and I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I am Harlan, and I am finally, truly free. After I walked out of that old house for the last time, I did not drive straight back to my modern penthouse. I needed a moment of silence, a place where the stench of lies and calculated greed could not reach me. I found myself driving toward Lakeview Cemetery, where my parents have been resting peacefully under the shade of ancient cedar trees. Seattle was incredibly still tonight, with only the rhythmic sound of my tires humming against the wet pavement. When I finally turned off the engine, the silence that enveloped me was not the cold, hollow loneliness I felt 2 years ago. It was the peaceful embrace of a daughter returning to the only family that ever truly protected her. I walked across the dewy grass, carrying a bunch of pristine white lilies, which were the same flowers my mother used to arrange in our living room every single weekend when I was a girl. I placed the bouquet against the simple granite headstone and sat directly on the damp grass, not caring one bit about the cold seeping into my expensive silk suit. "I did it, Mom," I whispered, my voice thick with a sudden surge of emotion. I sat there and told them everything about the $10 bill, about the days I worked until my body felt like it would break, and about the dinner I had just finished. I did not speak with a heart full of bitterness or revenge. Instead, I felt like a child showing her parents that she had finally learned how to be strong and how to protect the very things they had spent a lifetime teaching her, which were honesty and self-respect. I thought back to my father, a man who spent his life as a hard-working carpenter. He once told me that a house could fall, but your character must stand as firm as an oak tree in the middle of a storm. He lived his entire life with a quiet integrity, and looking at the moral decay of people like Lauren and Tatum, I realized just how precious my father's legacy really was. Their betrayal might have taken the physical house from me, but it could never touch the home I carry inside my soul, which is a place built on the foundation of my parents' unconditional love. In that stillness, I felt as if a warm hand was gently stroking my hair, soothing the scars that had been bleeding for 2 years. The faint moonlight reflected off the granite, making the white lilies glow with a kind of sacred purity. I realized then that I had finally forgiven myself for being too soft, for being the kind of woman who allowed others to trample over her heart. That old weakness had crystallized into a calm, unshakable strength. I stood up and brushed the grass from my clothes, feeling a lightness in my chest, as if 1,000-pound weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I am going to keep living, not to punish others, but to honor the kindness my parents left behind. As I walked out of the cemetery and looked at the distant city lights, I saw a future that was not just defined by financial success, but one that was overflowing with a deep and lasting peace. The peace I found at Lakeview Cemetery that night acted as a temporary anesthesia for my heart. I returned to my penthouse, breathing in the gentle scent of lavender essential oil, and I truly believed that everything had finally ended after that horrific dinner. I thought the truth had set me free, but I had drastically underestimated the sheer shamelessness of people who are backed into a corner. Monday morning arrived, and I was sipping a slightly bitter Starbucks coffee by the window, watching the gray mist roll over Elliott Bay. The doorbell rang, and for a moment I expected to see Marcus with another report, or Merritt with some paperwork to sign. Instead, I found a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit who handed me a thick envelope with an avoidant look in his eyes. He didn't say a word before turning away. I opened the packet, and my heart plummeted. It was a court summons for an emergency conservatorship. I stood in the middle of my living room, reading those cold, soulless words on the paper. Lorne and Tatum, working through a predatory lawyer from the outskirts of the city, had filed a petition with the King County Court. They were alleging that I was showing signs of early-onset dementia. They argued that my sudden accumulation of wealth and my extreme retaliatory actions against my own family were undeniable proof of mental instability. They wanted the court to appoint them as the sole managers of my entire estate and my life. The feeling of being violated was overwhelming. My privacy, my sacred freedom, and my very identity were under attack. I felt a hot surge of indignation crawl up my neck. They didn't just want to steal my hard-earned money anymore. They wanted to turn me into a voiceless doll locked inside my own home. They wanted to erase me while I was still standing. That afternoon, a confrontational meeting was held at a neutral law office in downtown Seattle. The air in the conference room was thick and suffocating, smelling of old paper and the constant hum of a struggling air conditioner. Lawrence sat there looking intentionally disheveled, wearing clothes that were a bit too large to make him look frail. He had those fake tears welling in his eyes, acting like a man burdened by a tragic duty. He looked at me and said that they were only doing this because they cared about me. He claimed I was spending money recklessly, and that hiring a private investigator to follow my own children was not the behavior of a sane woman. Tatum followed his lead, using a voice full of manufactured agony. She told the room that I needed professional care, and that they were the only ones who truly had my best interests at heart. Their sheer audacity made the air feel like lead. I felt a momentary wave of helplessness as they performed this cruel play in the name of family love. Merritt Klein sat right beside me, her presence as steady as an anchor. She reached over and briefly placed her hand on mine, a silent signal for me to remain calm. As the opposing lawyer began to drone on about the grave risks of me continuing to manage my own affairs, Merritt slowly opened her briefcase. She didn't interrupt him until he was finished. Then, she pulled out a thick dossier bound in dark blue. She spoke with a voice that was like iron, cutting through the nonsense. She told them that her client had fully anticipated this excessive display of concern. She laid out the comprehensive mental competency and physical health evaluation from Dr. Harrison at Virginia Mason, which had been completed only days prior. She pointed to the results, showing that my cognitive scores were far above the average for my age group. The room fell into a total and absolute silence. I watched as the confidence on Lauren's and Tatum's faces vanished in a split second, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Merritt didn't stop there. She leaned forward and delivered the decisive blow by presenting the evidence of Tatum's fraudulent debts and Lauren's fake cancer scheme. She argued that their motive was not care, but a blatant attempt at financial elder abuse. I stood up, feeling the initial rage transform into an unshakable pride. I looked them both in the eye and asked if they really thought they could use the law to imprison me. I told them that I had rebuilt my life from nothing and that no one had the right to take away the freedom I had fought so hard to win. Their lawyer began to clumsily pack up his papers, his hands shaking, while Lauren and Tatum stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. That confrontation had stripped away the very last shred of humanity they were trying to hide behind. I walked out of that office, feeling like I had just stepped out of a swamp and into the clean air. The late afternoon Seattle sun was shining down on the steep streets, and I took a deep breath of that free, crisp air. They had lost, not because I was wealthier, but because my truth and my preparation were a wall they could never climb. I had won the most difficult battle of my life to protect the person I had worked so hard to become. It's heartbreaking when care is used to steal our freedom. What do you think of Lauren and Tatum trying to seize their mother's assets by claiming she's lost her mind? Could you stay calm and fight back? Share your thoughts. Let's ensure our seniors feel safe and respected. I'm always here to listen. Following the humiliating failure of their attempt to claim I was losing my mind, Lauren and Tatum finally seemed to understand that the defensive wall I had built around my life was truly unbreakable. The days that followed were draped in the persistent drizzle of a classic Seattle autumn, where the sky hung low and gray, as if reflecting the heavy mood of those waiting for their own judgment to fall. I sat in Merritt's office, watching the skyscrapers blur into the mist and the city lights flicker like distant memories. The final dossier had been completed. Every shred of evidence regarding Tatum's fraudulent business practices and Lauren's elaborate medical lies was organized and ready to be delivered to the federal prosecutor's office. I took a deep breath of the sterile office air, preparing myself for this final encounter. Not to argue or to seek an apology, but to place a definitive period at the end of a relationship that had rotted through years of neglect and greed. The meeting took place in the main conference room of Merritt Klein's law firm. This time, there was no jazz playing in the background, and no aroma of home-cooked food to soften the edges of the truth. There was only the scent of fresh paper, the bitter steam of black coffee, and a silence that felt heavy with consequence. When Lauren and Tatum walked in, I almost did not recognize them. The expensive suits and the designer bags were gone, replaced by a look of sheer exhaustion. Lauren looked significantly older, his eyes sunken and his hands trembling with a genuine fear that no acting could ever replicate. Tatum looked gaunt, her heavy makeup unable to hide the hollow look of someone being circled by debt and the law. They sat down across from me, with their heads bowed, like students waiting for a punishment they knew they deserved. "Harlan, please," Loren began, his voice cracking and thin. He didn't look at me, but kept his gaze fixed on the mahogany table. "We were together for 30 years. Even if I made mistakes, I am still the father of your children. If you send this file over, Tatum, and I will lose everything we have left. Do you really want to see me go to prison? At my age?" Tatum started to sob, her tears leaving jagged tracks through her foundation as she pleaded with me. She called me a millionaire and told me that $200,000 was nothing to someone with my resources. She begged me to use my influence to withdraw the accusations, claiming that we were still family. They were still trying to use that same tired label to blur the lines of their crimes, as if being family gave them a permanent license to betray me. I looked at them both and realized I felt no anger and no sense of triumph. I only felt a vast and hollow emptiness. "You speak of 30 years?" I asked, my voice coming out with a calmness that surprised even me. During those 30 years, I gave my entire heart to caring for this family, only to receive a $10 bill and an invitation to take the bus on a freezing rainy night. Did you think of our 30 years then? When you tried to have me declared incompetent just to seize my properties? Did you think I was family? My questions hung in the cold air between us, without an answer. Their silence was the most honest thing they had offered me in years, a bitter admission of the pragmatism and cruelty they had chosen over love. Merritt slid a contract across the table toward them. Her voice was sharp and professional as she explained that this was not a rescue mission, but a final severance. It was a formal agreement renouncing any and all future claims or requests regarding my estate and my person, forever. In exchange, I would agree not to stand as a direct witness in any upcoming civil litigation, though they would still have to face the law on their own for their fraudulent actions. I would not use my wealth to bail them out or to pay for their mistakes. Tatum looked at the contract as if it were a noose, but she understood that this was the only exit that didn't lead directly to me pursuing additional charges for elder abuse. They signed the documents with shaking hands. As the final ink dried, I felt an invisible cord that had been binding me for decades snap cleanly. I stood up, and I didn't look back at them. Loren and Tatum were now just names from a previous life, strangers I had happened to share a stormy path with for a time. I walked out of the conference room, leaving behind their whispers and their late-arriving tears. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and a weak sliver of sunlight pierced through the Seattle clouds. I knew I had made the right choice. True forgiveness wasn't about covering up the wrong. It was about letting people face the reality of their own choices, while I walked away with my soul intact. I walked down 4th Avenue, feeling the breath of the city as it revived after the rain. I called Marcus to thank him and told him he could finally end the surveillance. Everything had truly come to an end. I felt stronger than I ever had, not because of the balance in my bank account, but because I was brave enough to protect my dignity from the people I had loved the most. Tonight, I decided I would treat myself to a quiet dinner at Canlis, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city I had conquered. A new chapter of my life had begun, and this time, I would be the one writing every word with freedom and self-respect. I stood before the full-length mirror in my dressing room, adjusting the lapels of my charcoal gray wool vest. It was a suit that commanded respect without shouting for attention. This morning, Seattle had decided to be kind. There was no rain, and the early sun was beginning to pierce through a thin veil of fog, casting a brilliant, shimmering light over the surface of Lake Washington. After the intense meeting and the signing of the settlement at Merritt's office, today was the day the King County Superior Court would officially hand down its judgment on the emergency conservatorship petition that Lorne and Tatum had filed against me. I felt a strange and profound stillness in my soul. There was no more anxiety and no more flickering shadows of fear. I knew that once I walked through those heavy courthouse doors, a long and painful chapter of my life would be closed forever, sealed by the red stamp of the truth. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't see the woman who had been left in the rain. I saw a woman who had survived and thrived. The King County Courthouse was bustling, as it always is on a Monday morning, but the air inside felt heavy with the weight of consequence. The smell of old polished wood and endless stacks of paper, mixed with the sound of hurried footsteps on the marble floors, created an atmosphere that was uniquely solemn. I sat beside Merritt at the plaintiff's table, my hands resting lightly on the cool mahogany surface. Across the aisle, Lorne and Tatum sat with their heads down. Their presence, which once felt so looming and threatening, now seemed incredibly small and pathetic. They didn't dare to look at me. The arrogance they had displayed 2 years ago, when they handed me that $10 bill, had completely evaporated, leaving behind only the hollow faces of people who knew they had reached a dead end. They were no longer the predators, and I was no longer the prey. Judge Miller, a woman with a crown of white hair and a gaze that could cut through stone, took her seat and began to read the final ruling. Her voice echoed throughout the high-ceilinged courtroom with a steady and rhythmic authority. She stated that after a thorough review of the medical records from Virginia Mason and the associated financial reports, the court found the petition for conservatorship over Mrs. Harlan to be completely without merit. She paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she looked directly at Lorne and Tatum. She expressed the court's deep concern that the legal systems, designed to protect the elderly, were being weaponized for selfish and petty personal gain. She noted that attempting to strip a citizen as lucid and capable as Mrs. Harlan of her autonomy was not just a legal error, but a profound insult to the values of family and human dignity. Judge Miller continued by affirming that Mrs. Harlan had full and absolute control over her assets, her life, and her personal associations. The court also formally recognized the legal and personal support provided by Merritt Klein and Detective Marcus Reed as being entirely lawful and ethical in the protection of their client. Hearing those words sent a surge of energy down my spine. It wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about the fact that my value as a human being had been recognized by society and the law in the most powerful way possible. I looked over at Merritt, who gave me a small, knowing smile and reached over to squeeze my hand. It was a gesture of solidarity from someone who had started as a stranger and become my most trusted ally during my darkest hours. The judge was not finished yet. She announced that the evidence regarding Tatum's online fraudulent activities and Lauren's falsified medical records had been officially referred to the prosecutor's office for further criminal investigation. She concluded by stating that the law exists to protect the honest and not to act as a screen for deceitful behavior. Then she brought the gavel down. The sound was sharp and final, echoing like a gunshot that signaled the end of Lorne and Tatum's long play of lies. I saw Tatum break down into jagged sobs, while Lorne sat there, looking like a hollowed-out shell of a man, staring into space. They had dug their own graves with their greed and their lack of a moral compass. As we walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway, Lorne suddenly hurried after me, reaching out as if to grab my sleeve. He started to plead with me, telling me that I couldn't let them take him away and that he was too old for prison. I stopped and turned to look directly into the eyes of the man I had once loved, eyes that were now overflowing with a selfish and desperate fear. "Lauren," I said, my voice low and heavy with a quiet sadness, "I am not doing anything to you. Your own actions have brought you to this place. You chose a $10 bill over loyalty and love, and now you have to face the consequences of that choice alone. I gently pulled my arm away, feeling no bitterness or hatred, only a total and absolute sense of peace. I had fulfilled my obligation to the past, and now I belonged entirely to the future. Merritt and Marcus were waiting for me in the grand lobby. We walked out of the courthouse together into a Seattle afternoon that was now brighter than ever. A cool breeze from Elliott Bay swept toward us, carrying the scent of salt water and the freshness of the sea. I took a deep breath, feeling my lungs expand with the air of true freedom. Merritt told me it was time to go because we had a celebratory lunch waiting for us at a restaurant overlooking the water. I nodded and walked beside them, my chosen family. As we moved through the crowds of people, I felt small in the grand scheme of the city, but also incredibly vast, because I had protected my heart from the rot of resentment, and I had reclaimed my right to own my life. I took one last look back at the imposing courthouse building. It had witnessed my pain being laid bare, but it had also been the place where my honor was restored. I knew that from this day forward, the name Harlan would never again be associated with the word victim. I was a successful businesswoman, an autonomous woman, and above all, a mother who was brave enough to teach her family a final lesson about justice and truth. As my black SUV glided through the city streets, I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror, a woman who was strong, composed, and full of hope. My real life was only just beginning. A year has passed since the day I walked out of that courtroom, a free woman. Today is Thanksgiving, and my penthouse is filled with the warm sense of cinnamon-roasted turkey and the sound of lively laughter. I stand out on the balcony, looking down at Elliott Bay as it sparkles with the evening lights. That old $10 bill now sits quietly in a small glass frame on my desk. It is no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a testament to the power of rebirth. I no longer look back at the past with resentment, because my soul is now too full of the kindness of the present. Harlan, the turkey is done. Are you going to keep staring at the view forever? Merritt's voice rings out from the dining room, and I smile as I step back inside. Around the large oak table sit more than just Merritt and Marcus. I am also joined by Joe, the motel owner, and his family, the very people who took me in when I had nothing but a suitcase soaked by the rain. We hold hands and offer our thanks for these wonderful connections. I realize now that family does not have to be defined by blood. Family is the people who choose to stay by your side when the storm hits, the ones who cherish you for exactly who you are and not for what you own. I have never felt wealthier, not because of the $10 million in the bank, but because of the sincere love warming this room. Hello, everyone. I am Casey. Mrs. Harlan's story closes here, but it opens up a deep reflection for all of us. Witnessing a mother pushed to the edge of abandonment only to rise again helps us understand that a person's dignity never depends on how others treat them. To the wonderful women listening, if you are feeling hurt by the ones you love most, remember that you always have the right to choose a new life for yourself. Do not let anyone's $10 bill define your worth. Walk forward bravely, build your own defenses, and open your heart to kind strangers. Because sometimes that is exactly where your true family is waiting for you. What did you think of Mrs. Harlan's story? Is there a lesson or a message that you have taken away for yourself after listening? I really want to know your thoughts, so please share your opinions in the comments below. Thank you for joining me in this series, I will see you in the next healing stories.